The year 1991 became a breaking point for the Soviet Union. For the first time since the October Revolution, our glorious state was on the brink of collapse. The so-called perestroika had a terrible impact on the Soviet lifestyle and the socialist ideology. Previously, our economy struggled because the conservative faction of the Communist Party resisted implementing any reforms. However, the situation worsened dramatically due to the Gorbachev's policies in the late 1980s. By 1991, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved and the Soviet Union was collapsing from the inside. Numerous Soviet republics declared independence, and the tensions were growing from the Carpathian Mountains to the Russian Far East. Something had to be done to stop the suicidal course of the failing government. It was the time when a group of the Soviet Patriots said enough to Gorbachev and his perestroika. In August 1991, Gennady Yanayev was appointed as the new head of the Soviet government. He had previously served as the vice president of the Soviet Union, making him a legitimate figure for the transfer of power from a traitor. Of course, this couldn't happen without the help of the KGB and the Soviet Army, which played a crucial role in defeating the reformists. The same day the new government was established, Boris Yeltsin was found and executed by the KGB. The Soviet Union was saved, but its problems weren't solved. The following decade was filled with contradictions. It had been less than 10 years since that fateful day, August 19, 1991. When those tanks rolled into Moscow, nobody knew that we would be changing history. Nobody understood the gravity of the situation at hand, of the unfolding events that would change the very course of the Russia's past. The day it all went down and the week that followed would come to define us, define our glorious union, define our situation for the foreseeable future. It was the August Coup. Our forces had moved with great haste and swift prejudice. We couldn't watch as our glorious motherland died at the hands of the new Union Treaty and Yeltsin traitors. We couldn't stand by and watch as it all came apart, and so we did as any reasonable man in our situation would do. We took charge of the problem at hand and we struck it down. When we have committed to the movement, when we had put our support behind the coup, we knew there would be consequences. Some as dire as member states leaving, an economic shock, a political upheaval, but then, now, did we know we could deal with it all, one by one, step by step if we need be, and yet here we stood, a nation hobbling alone with one foot in an open grave, a red node so vibrant as the triumphant revolutionary it had once been. Where was Marx's sunrise, our glorious Red Star?
Крепит нас стремление сделать все ради возрождения Родины, идти вперед по пути социалистического обновления.
The year 2000 began with the appointment of a new military command, including a well-known Field Marshal, Dmitriy Yazov, a veteran of the Great Patriotic War and the man who saved the Soviet Union in 1991. An old military man knew that the future belongs to the talented young people, so he promoted a famous general, Sergei Surovikin, to command the 3rd Tank Army. In August 1991, Sergei was a young officer whose battalion played a significant role in defeating the traitors and pushing the liberals out of Moscow. Trust is the crucial feeling for building a strong army in difficult times, so the rest of the generals were also the people whom we could trust. The difficult decade has finally come to an end. But what's next? What awaits the Soviet state in the new millennium? Let's find out. It has been 83 years since the Aurora fired on the Winter Palace, signaling the beginning of the Soviet era, and it has been 9 years since it almost ended. The catastrophe of the Soviet stagnation for the past 20 years culminated in Gorbachev's failed leadership, which in turn created an even bigger reaction that was the August Coup of 1991. The fate of the Union hangs in balance as only the leadership of the GKChP stopped it from falling over the edge. But now, 9 years later, the situation is no better than before, except now there are no more Yeltsins or Gorbachevs to take the blame. We need to make changes in our system to restore the greatness of the Soviet Union. Most importantly, we must start telling the truth, as the continuous lies to the government and the party have led us to this dire situation. The collective farms lied about the milk production and the livestock populations. Factories lied about the steel production and consumer goods, so people had to exchange the products for food. Everybody knew that everyone was lying, but no one did anything about it. To save the Soviet Union, we must put an end to this practice. By the year 2000, our sphere of influence had substantially diminished, leaving only a handful of countries aligned with us. Among them was Ethiopia. In 1993, we provided a massive support to the ruling Communist Party in suppressing various rebellions throughout the country, and we must extend our assistance to our African comrades once more. We can't afford to lose any more allies, as these are the states that are left with us in these challenging times. 2 mechanized divisions were deployed to Addis Ababa to support the Ethiopian offensive. Their mission was to gain experience in combat operations within the Red Terrain and to help suppress the rebellions of various partisan groups. Additionally, we provided assistance to our allies in Angola, helping them defeat a pro-American regime and establish a new state strongly influenced by the Soviet Union. The rebuilding of the USSR must begin with the renewed expansion of the Soviet influence all across the world. How could the monolith that was our glorious communist society fail? The greatest, the freest, most fair system in the world. Well, as it turns out, throwing a government bureaucracy through a military coup that replaces the entire strata of said bureaucracy with the new faces, primarily based on yes man and political affluence, there is a good bit of slowing to be had. When Gorbachev first took the office, and when he started implementing his reforms, Yanayev claims to have seen it for what it was, the way to save the Soviet Union. Well, to do that, he had to do a small bit of economic remodeling. Some tariffs here, some reforms there, and of course, go through with almost returning to a military budget proportional to the Second World War. The sudden influx of unemployment into the market was, of course, offset by the brilliant genius of our economic mastery, allowing us to assign jobs and duties. But by some work of the West, it hasn't done much to improve the things. We haven't fallen per se, but we haven't progressed either. The economy is in a clear bout of stagnation, a several-year-long period of failure to advance the well-being of a population growingly unsated, even with all the reforms we tried. Now we are looking down the double barrel of both economy and the military. However, it is only the beginning. Everybody understands that Yanayev can no longer effectively lead the Soviet Union, so a new leader needs to take the place of the indecisive communist. On January 11th, we received a secret report from our agents detailing the internal situation within the Communist Party and identifying potential candidates for the leadership in the Soviet government. The Union has undergone many reforms and changes in both positive and negative forms. It was a tough time, but we marched on. After extensive investigations in the 1990s, the enemies of the state have been found and removed, except Mikhail Gorbachev, as he is considered no longer to be a threat to the stability of the Union. Further, the new head of the army is Dmitriy Yazov, a feared and capable man who will lead the reformed Soviet army. The new head of the KGB is a promising young man named Vladimir Putin, who will be instrumental to the Soviet Union. Boris Puga will be permanent Minister of Internal Affairs, as he played a big part in the August Coup, so he will remain in his position. So, the spectre of militarism. Marshal of the Soviet Union, General Dmitry Yazov, who has been leading the militarist faction of the party, is rising in influence. Capitalizing on the reclamation of the Baltics and the Caucasus, Yazov is pushing for increased funding of the army, even higher than its current levels. It has come to a point that we need to acknowledge this rising star. The Soviet Union needs a leader who can compete with the West and restore its former glory. Only such a person can get us through these turbulent times and lead the USSR to its new greatness, much like Joseph Stalin did after the death of Vladimir Lenin 76 years ago. There are numerous problems with the modern Soviet Union that only a person with an iron fist can resolve. Meeting of the High Command. The Soviet army, no matter how you looked at it, was the only force keeping the pace in the ever-fracturing Union, one that was increasingly failing to quell the uprisings and separatist movements. But despite their best efforts, the consistently liberal reforms of the General Secretary have seen the once mighty Soviet army reduced to a mere paper tiger, one that can't even enforce law and order within its borders, let alone the world. For many, this is the breaking point, and the conspiracies of all manners have begun to spread like cancer among the Communist Party. One such conspirator is the Minister of Defense, Dmitry Yazov, who has been critical of Yanayev's liberal policies ever since the coup. He and his fellow conspirators have taken it upon themselves to organize a meeting for only the highest members of the military. This meeting took place in a barracks on the far outskirts of Leningrad, far from the eyes of the spineless bureaucrats of Yanayev. Here, Yazov made his concerns clear to the High Command. If they didn't step in, the union they had fought so hard to protect would crumble like a house of cards. Only the army, the backbone of the Soviet proletariat, could ensure the continuous prosperity of the USSR, and finally reassert its place as a superpower on a world stage. With that, the goal was clear. It was either the army's triumph or the union's death. In late January, our mechanized divisions arrived at the Ethiopian front line and successfully pushed back the Eritrean forces all the way to the mountains. This advance opened the area around the capital city for the Soviet troops. The Eritrean army didn't resist, and we were able to enter the administrative buildings of Asmara without any difficulties. Victory in the war for the African Horn is crucial for the Soviet command, as it would allow us to expand our bases in the Red Sea. This expansion would enable us to strengthen our support for the Arabian socialist movements and apply pressure on the Saudi Arabia. The last pockets of resistance in Eritrea were broken by June 2000, and the Soviet Union secured a brilliant victory. It marked a turning point in the geopolitical decline of the Soviet influence and represented the first victory in the international arena since 1991. The Soviet command was so proud of our victories in Ethiopia that they launched a new offensive in Angola, where Soviet troops fought against the Americans for the first time in many years. The US government was shocked by our victories, so they decided to withdraw their troops from Angola, only to avoid being captured by the Soviet mechanized forces. On the 31st of July, MPLA declared victory in the Angola Civil War, which lasted for over 25 years and was stopped in less than half a year with the help of the Soviet troops. However, it wasn't just the victory of the Soviet Union. It was also a significant triumph for Dmitry Yazov. He demonstrated that only through strong leadership and unwavering determination can the USSR regain its former greatness. In just 6 months, we achieved several major victories that the Union hadn't experienced since the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. The tensions were growing among the Communist Party, as they realized that the military group wouldn't step back in securing all the power. Despite our bright victories, the General Secretary Yanayev decided to defund the military sector due to what he said was a lack of money. This was a decision we couldn't ignore. It wasn't about us, it was about the security of the Union. Marshal Yazov issued a protest against Yanayev's decision to defund the army. In his letter, he stated, "A country without a strong military cannot defend the workers' revolution. As much as he is right, we cannot focus only on the military while our people worry about their future." This has triggered a party meeting about all the recent actions and the current state of the Soviet Union. Under the pressure of Vladimir Putin, the new head of the KGB, and the militarist faction within the Communist Party, Yanayev declared that the Soviet Union was unprepared for the military actions. He also asserted that the recent Soviet victories on the world stage were remarkable achievements, claiming that only a highly organized leader could accomplish such success amidst the challenging realities since 1991. This was the point at which everybody realized that the real power now belonged to the high military command with Dmitriy Yazov at its head. There is only one last step left necessary to secure the power: to remove Yanayev in the same manner as we did with the General Secretary Khrushchev 4 decades ago. No, this can't be. It just can't be. We did everything. How could it possibly not be working? Yanayev looked at the economic reports that the Union's economic ministry delivered to him. After putting the papers on his desk, he sat back in his chair. Looking at the clock, only then did he realize it was well past midnight. Almost 20 hours without sleep, or what? Another failure. He just signed and thought himself, how old were all the other general secretaries before him? Perhaps it was the time for him to finally consider retirement. After all, the party could decide who could replace him. Maybe Khrushchev could come out from retirement and take the temporary leadership until the party sorts itself out. Still, he couldn't really leave it empty. Besides the main players like Puga and Yazov, there were many more, ready to tear each other apart as soon as he either resigned or kicked the bucket. But whatever he was thinking at that moment was quickly dashed aside as soon as his secretary entered. "Comrade Yanayev, I'm delivering a letter from the Politburo. They requested that this letter be urgently sent to you," he said. Yanayev took the letter into his hands and then dismissed the secretary. Opening it, he didn't know what to expect, but there was a feeling that it couldn't be anything good. The letter was long, perhaps too long for him to read at this hour, but he continued. The structure and the language were formal, as per usual, but the contents of the sentences were rather serious. "Due to failures of your initiatives in both economic and political sectors, as well as overall lack in leadership, the Politburo considers your resignation or early retirement to be placed as one of the issues on the next session of the party's Central Committee." Yanayev sat there in total silence as he reread the entire paragraph again and looked at the list of signatures of all members of the Politburo. This can't be. He knew that the party was displeased with his leadership for the past several years, but it still came as a shock to him. He just placed the letter back on his table and stood up to look outside the window. In 7 minutes and 46 seconds, one turbulent and troubled era of the Soviet history ended. To many, it was a slight relief, but to some, it was a sign that the dark clouds were gathering over the Union. The latest news coming out of the Soviet Union have shocked the world, as Gennady Yanayev, a man who was the main instigator of the August Coup that preserved the Soviet Union, has resigned today from the position of General Secretary. Whatever the case may be, this is a truly unexpected event that might have just changed the future of the Soviet Union. As of now, Valentin Pavlov has been chosen by the CPCU to be the temporary General Secretary. While the situation may seem grim, we have received some positive news from Europe. The last stronghold of the socialism, known as Czechoslovakia, recently held a party congress in which the pro-Soviet communists regained control of the government. It's crucial for us to support our last ally in the Europe, especially since NATO and the United States aim to destabilize Czechoslovakia and undermine its ruling party. Their ultimate goal is to expand the Western Bloc into Eastern Europe, thereby destroying the Soviet sphere of influence. We must do everything we can to keep the Czechoslovakia aligned with us. On November 16th, the party convened a congress to determine the fate of the Soviet Union. Millions of Soviet citizens are eagerly awaiting the results, as this represents a final opportunity to restore our position at the top of the world. The Union's future will be decided in the coming days. It has been several days since Yanayev resigned as the General Secretary, and the party congress has begun. Tensions in the hall were high, as many just awaited the opportunity to grab the position of the most powerful man in the USSR. Many deals, backstabs and shady actions have been going on far from the public's eyes and ears. However, even this long meeting has come to an end, and as the speaker walked behind the microphone at the main stand, the final voting began. The next leader of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is Dmitriy Yazov. Ura, 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 товарищи! The world's largest media were horrified. Dmitriy Yazov, also known as the Iron Marshal, was elected the new ruler of the Soviet Union. Being an experienced officer and one of the main agitators of the August Coup, Yazov was expected to become the next leader. With all the greetings and the celebrations done, many believe that Yazov has already begun to secure his power over the state with the help of the Soviet army. Almost 60 years ago, he fought Nazis as a young man, as a great patriot of his state. Yazov had an iron discipline and was never implicated in corruption. He opposed Gorbachev's attempts to rebuild the Soviet Union, believing that its strengths lay in a powerful army and robust military production. Yazov witnessed the greatest and the darkest moments of the Soviet Union, but he never stopped believing in the Soviet dream. Only a firm, iron hand can make the USSR great again. November 19th is the day when the new Soviet Union was born, so it's time for the red dusk to turn into a red sunrise.